Good morning. This is the first session of the last module for this term. And our topic is on word problem solving. Okay? Now, for this session, we are expected to number one, recall Polia's four-step strategy. We learned this in the first term, if you might remember. Number two, to recall translating verbal phrases and statements to their mathematical equivalents. Natutunan din natin yan, no? Nung previous terms. And lastly, we are expected to solve mathematical word problems using the RESA or RISA format. Okay? At this point, you're also expected to have already engaged session 0 materials, the PowerPoint, in preparation for this session. So, before we dive into problem solving itself, here are some few more reminders. After the session, you need to accomplish FA12B no later than 6 p.m. today. You also need to download and study the asynchronous materials in preparation for session 2 and to continue answering your Cerebri exercises 4.1, 4.2, and 9.2. Remember, these exercises, they are due by the end of the term. So para din hindi ka mag-cram, I suggest that you keep on answering. So to those who have already finished, good job. To those who haven't, pag may extra time, practice. Okay? Now, let's do some quick drills in terms of translating phrases, these 5 phrases, to their mathematical equivalents. Okay? Now, pause this video first. Try these items, on your notebook. And then when you're done, hit play and check whether you got the correct answers or not. Right. At this point, dapat meron na kayong answers sa ating 5 items. You should have gotten for number 1, x plus 6, 2x minus 11 for number 2, x minus 17 for number 3, 3x minus 8 for number 4, and finally, 3 times the quantity 2 plus 2x for number 5. Of course, pwede kayong gumamit ng ibang variables other than x. Remember, variables are just placeholders. So you can use practically any letter that you want. Right? Next step. Ganun pa din. Pause this video. Try the items first. Try to translate these statements into their mathematical equivalents and hit play when you're done. Right. At this point, dapat meron na kayo answers. For number 6, dapat yan ay 1/2 x plus 1 equals 15. Number 7, dapat 2 minus 3x is equal to negative 10. Si number 8, 2x is greater than 12. Oh, kakatapos lang natin ng inequalities, ha? Then you have 6 minus x is less than or equal to 1 for number 9. And finally, 2x is greater or equal to 13. Okay? Of course, there are other variations of these expressions other than the use of different variables. Ano? For example, si number 6, pwedeng x over 2 yan, plus 1 equals 15. Okay? So again, there might be different variations, but basically, yan yung typical answers natin, no, in terms of translating. Okay? Now, a lot of you have some sort of fear of word problem solving. Most of my students said ito nga daw nagpahirap sa kanila ng grade 6. But, of course, there are keys to not experiencing these difficulties and effectively solving such word problems. And the tools that we can use to effectively solve algebraic word problems, we already encountered partly in the first term with Polia's four-step strategy. But now, in this term, we are adding onto this our RESA or RISA format. Now, when I say or RESA or RISA, kasi hindi sa lahat ng pagkakataon, the second letter in the acronym is E. No? From your engagement of the asynchronous materials, the E stands for equations. But since we already learned about inequalities, sometimes inequalities are what can solve a certain word problem. Okay? That depends on the context, of course. We will explore these possibilities as we dig deeper and deeper into our module. Now remember, yung Polya's four-step strategy, no? We begin by understanding the problem. We unlock those that we know. We ask ourselves what don't we know. And even how you feel about the problem is part of understanding it. Now, number two, see, devise a plan. No, this is where we can select from among the various heuristics which we also learned in previous terms. But this is actually when the RESA format starts coming in. No? Kumbaga naka-embed siya kay devising a plan is stage 2. In that, part of that is representing, no, using variables or variable expressions, the unknown quantities in our problem. Again, you already engaged the material in the asynchronous materials. And also, no, setting up your equation or inequality is part of devising your plan. That is, of course, if you opt to go to that direction, the use of that particular heuristic, solving an equation or an inequality. Now, the next stage in Polya's strategy, of course, is carrying out the plan, and under the RESA or RESA format, this is where we solve our equation or inequality. Of course, we do it step by step, systematic, detailed solving of our equation or inequality. Then finally, we look back. This is a really important step, no, even for the use of RESA. When you look back, generally we look at the validity of our and the soundness, yeah, of our answer, because sometimes we are quite careless with stating our final answer. Hindi na pala nagme-make sense in the context of the problem. So even before we state our final answer, we need to look back, ask ourselves questions like, does our answer make sense? No, ito ba talaga yung hinahanap ng problem? Because sometimes the root of an equation that you solve under solving the equation, no, under the RESA format is not actually what is being asked. Okay, we'll see some examples like that in a while. Okay, so if you notice, hindi bago technically si RESA format. We can think of it as sub stages that are embedded, no, into the four-step strategy by George Polya. Okay, now let's answer some simple problems first. Number one, twice the sum of a number and 9 is 14. What is the number? Now, sa RESA format, of course, if we embed that onto the Polya strategy, four-step strategy, of course, we start with our representation. This is where we define the variables we will use. And by define, literally, we will be using complete statements, no, defining what our variable is. May nakita natin samples niyan sa asynchronous material, of course. And since variables, remember, by definition, are placeholders of numbers, generally, we'd like to represent, using variables, those values that the problem is looking for in the first place. Di ba? Para pag na-solve mo yung equation or inequality, it's almost directly the answer. Kasi if what you're looking for is the one we represent with a variable, once we solve for the root, once we find the value of the variable, then basically that's it. We have already answered our problem. So in the context of our problem here, ang tanong dito, look, what is the number? No, the number we're looking for, twice the sum of that number and 9 is 14. So, ang gagawin ko dito, ano pinahanap? What number is that? That will basically be my representation. Okay, I will let x be that number that I am looking for, whatever that is. Okay, so notice kung gaano ka-direct, what is the number yung tanong, ang representation ko, I will let x be that number. Okay? So, my next stage then is setting up my equation. And to do that, what we can do, a skill we learned in the second term, we translate the words in the problem to their mathematical equivalents. Natutunan natin yan when we engaged algebraic expressions, the materials for algebraic expressions. We started with translating verbal phrases to algebraic expressions and vice versa. And then, gagamitin natin yung relationships na pinapaliwanag sa problem, in setting up our equation, or again, in some cases, our inequality. Now, look at this. Let's copy our problem here, and let's dissect our problem. Look at the first word there, twice. Ano nga ibig sabihin ng twice? Doble, 2 times something. That is what twice means. Twice what? Let's continue dissecting. Twice what? The sum of a number and 9. No? A number. Hindi natin alam nga yung number na yun. But we represented that number with the variable x. No? So the sum of a number and 9 translates as x plus 9. Diba? So twice that. Twice the quantity x plus 9. Now, ito na itong simpleng word na to, no, is. Something as simple as the verb is ay napaka-importante sa ating problem. In fact, is means is equal to. No? Twice the sum of a number and 9 is. Kumbaga, that's the same as saying twice the sum of a number and 9 is equal to, what daw? 14. Of course, that will be the value on the other side of the equal sign. And right there, when we dissected our problem, we're able to unlock the equation that we need to solve. So we have 2 times the quantity x plus 9 is equal to 14. Di ba? Ang dali pa niyang tignan. No? Mukhang we should be very confident at this point. We've answered far more difficult equations than this. So now, of course, we solve. And in this stage, dapat careful step-by-step solution, systematic step-by-step solutions pinapakita natin, ano? To determine the root of our equation. And it pays to copy the equation, no? Start with that. Kung ano yung equation natin sinet up, copy mo ulit, and then you solve from there. Do not begin with a manipulated version of the equation. Wag muna. No? Careful tayo dapat. So you copy the equation and then you proceed from there. Okay? You can apply, of course, when you attempt to solve this. You can apply your distributive property of multiplication over addition and multiply 2 by x then 2 by 9. Pero pwede rin naman mag-MPE na ako kaagad. Look, I can multiply both sides by 2. I'm able to do that kasi if I look at the right hand side of the equation, that's an even number. Appears to be divisible by 2. Diba? So again, that could be one strategy to do that. So we multiply 1/2 to both sides of the equation to eliminate the multiplier na 2 on the left hand side. I end up with x plus 9 equals 7. Then of course, now I apply my APE. I add negative 9 to both sides of my equation and I end up with x equals negative 2. Okay? Now, hindi ito ang i-encircle mo, hindi yan ang bibilugan mo final answer because you were asked in words. It's only logical that you answer back, no, in word form as well. But before we do that, remember, we need to look back, sabi ni Polya. Look back. Ang ating bang answer, does it make sense in the context of the problem? No? And in fact, if we look at the number negative 2, no, we can do multiple things in order to check whether we are correct or not. Most of the time, what works is we plug our root negative 2 back into the equation, simplify both sides of the equation, and check whether we end up with a true statement or not. That is, of course, granting that your equation is correct in the first place. Huh? So here, we have our equation, original equation, 2 times the quantity x plus 9 equals 14. No? So since we were able to solve for the root negative 2, I plug that back in the equation instead of x. That will be 2 times the quantity negative 2 plus 9 equals 14. Then of course, I simplify the left-hand side and I see that I end up with 14 equals 14, a true mathematical statement. That is one way of testing whether we did the solving right. Okay? And of course, you can also use scratch paper and look at this. Twice the sum of a number and 9. The sum of a number and 9. Our number is negative 2. No? What is the sum of our number and 9? Hindi ba 7? Oh, this is 7. Oh, and then sabi, twice that sum. Twice 7 daw is 14. Even without actually solving an equation. But you can do the checking verbally, if you think about it. But of course, it's safer if you write it down. Okay? So we are sure now that our root makes sense. So we now say it back in word form. We say, therefore, that the number is negative 2. Look at my final answer also. It's a really simple statement, a concise statement. I don't have to be flowery with my words about it. Sabihin ko lang, ang tanong sa akin, what is the number? Ang sagot ko, the number is -2. Diba? Okay na yan. So that right there is our final answer. So look at this very systematic way of solving the problem. No? We start with the R, then the E, then the S, then the A. Okay? Now, kayo, try nyo to. 50 reduced by thrice the sum of a number and 2 is 14. What is the number? Again, pause muna ang video, hit play when you're done, and then check whether we have the same solution and final answer. Okay? Right. At this point, dapat meron na kayong sagot. Let's see. For my representation, tingnan natin dito, what is the number? So ako, pinakamadali, I'll let x be the number that I'm looking for. Okay? Then I set up my e by, again, dissecting my equation. 50 reduced by, so 50 babawasan mo ng thrice, 3 times, the sum of a number and 2. So, ang equation ko dapat ay ganito. Diba? 50 minus 3 times the quantity x plus 2 is equal to 14. Ganyan diba nakuha ninyo? Okay? And then when I solve, I'll not detail these solving steps anymore. But I should get x equals 10. Okay? Again, you can check that by plugging in your root in your equation. If I rewrite my equation here, 50 minus 3 times the quantity x plus 2 equals 14. If I plug in my 10 back into my equation, will I get a true statement? Let's see. 50 minus 3 times 12 yan, ano? If I do my PEMDAS, equals 14. That's gonna be a 50 minus 36. Is that equal to 14? And the 50 minus 36 is, in fact, tama naman. 14. Check. Correct. Ibig sabihin, confident tayo. I will now state my final answer. The number is 10. O, diba? Napakadali. Okay. Again, try nyo dito. 10 more than twice a number is greater than -2. Oh, what is the smallest integer that fits that description? Okay. Now, this should give you a hint, no? Na hindi equation ang gagamitin natin dito. Look at this phrase right here. Is greater than. Oh, that should already give you a clue kung anong kailangan gamitin natin. So again, pause muna, hit play when you're done. Right, may solution ka na dapat. Let's see. What is the smallest integer that fits this description? So maybe I will let x be, well, the number that I am looking for, no? Sabi, 10 more than twice a number is greater than -2. Okay, so that number, a number, I'll let that be x. And if I, again, dissect particularly my first sentence here, 10 more than, that should be 10 plus, twice a number, that's 2x, based on my representation, is greater than -2. So my inequality here, not my equation, ano? Inequality should be this. 10 plus 2x is greater than -2. Okay? On now solve. Again, I'll just reveal the solving steps here. Kasi dapat at this point, na-master na natin ang solving ng inequalities, no? From last module. We should have x is greater than -6. Now, again, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, no? There are times when the solution, or in this case, the solution set of my inequality is not really the answer to the problem. Kasi if I look back, remember after my solving, I look back at the problem. What's the question? What is the smallest integer that fits this description? So I cannot say that this is my final answer. I cannot just box that and move on to the next item. No. Ano ba ang smallest integer daw that fits the description? But sabi dito, x is greater than -6. In other words, the number that we are looking for, the number that could fit the possibility, is greater than -6. Pero, more specifically, sabi dito, the smallest integer. What is the smallest integer that fits that description? Diba? Kung isipin natin, look at this. This is -5. That is the next larger integer after -6, but also the smallest in the solution set. Yung sinasabi, the smallest that fits the description. Oh, diba? So again, based on our looking back, we can now safely and confidently state that my final answer is that the smallest integer fitting that description is negative 5. Okay? So again, kailangan iniintindi na mabuti yung problem. Okay, good. Oops. Next. The sum of two numbers is 10. Okay? Twice the smaller number added to the larger results in 13. What are the numbers? Okay, I'll give you some time to digest the problem. Hindi. Right. Now, ang tanong dito, look at the question, the third sentence. What are the numbers? What are the numbers? So plural. I'm looking for two numbers, sir. Okay. Does that mean, though, that since we're looking for two numbers, does it mean that we use two different variables? X tsaka Y? You know? A or B? M and N? Is that a good idea? Now, to answer those questions, let's accomplish this table here. Let's say we have two numbers, a first and a second number, and their sum. Okay? Kasi parang ganun yung context ng problem eh. You're looking for two numbers with a certain sum. So let's say for our first line here, my first number is 3. Let's say I do not know my second number. Hindi ko alam kung ano siya. But I do know the sum of my two numbers. So my first number is known, it's 3. I don't know my second number, but I know their sum, 8. Ang tanong, ano second number? Correct, napakadali. Kahit grade 2 kaya sagutin to. The answer is 5. Di ba? But the important question is, paano kinukuha yun? No? Again, a grade 2 student can answer this. Sir, I know the sum. I don't know one of the two addends. So what I do is, I subtract the sum by one of the addends to get the other addend. No, very simple. It's 8 minus 3. No, that's a really important strategy. No? You'll see why. Next line, what if my first number is 4? I don't know my second number, but their sum is 6. The second number, of course, is 2. That is from 6 minus 4 equals 2. Ganun din, kung 1 ang first number ko, sum nila ay 9. Nung second na unknown number, I get that by subtracting 9 by 1 to get 8. Si 2, first number. Sum ay 11, di ko alam yung second. I go 11 minus 2 to get my second number, 9. Well, that makes sense. It's very, very easy. But what if we now, instead of having first numbers that are integers or real numbers in general, what if, gawin natin n, an unknown number n. Sino kaya si n? Di natin alam. But I know, let's say that their sum, a second number, and n, their sum is 5. Paano mo ko yung second number? So, tingnan natin itong mga nauna. Ang ginagawa lang naman natin to determine the second number is to take away from the sum our first number. Look at this. 8, the sum, less 3, the first number. Look at this. 9, the sum, less 1, the first number. So, by that same principle, dapat the sum, 5, less the first number, n, in other words, 5 minus n, that should be my second number. Tama, di ba? In fact, if you test this, sabi sum. Pag inad ko ba yan? N plus 5 minus n, is that equal to 5? Of course, di ba? N and negative n are additive inverses. N plus negative n by the inverse property of addition sums up to 0. Sum up to 0. So, 5 is indeed equal to 5. Correct. Kaya, ganyan yung ating representation. Di ba? So, if it became E, the sum is 24. My second number, by the same principle, is 24 minus E. O, di ba? If it were x and the sum were 10, my second number would be 10 minus x. Now, hindi ibig sabihin na, sir, bakit natin pinilit na ganito? Yung first question mo why don't we use two variables, say x and y? Is that bawal? Prohibited ba yan? No, it's not. No? Using multiple variables is not prohibited. However, it is always better to use as few variables as possible. Kung pwede nga one variable lang, no? X lang or y lang in your equation. Sure, again, bakit? Although we cannot really answer that in detail now in grade 7, you will learn in grade 8 that if you solve an equation that involves multiple variables, say at least 2, x and y, you will learn in grade 8 that solving that, you will need more equations too. And generally, we don't want that. We don't really want to complicate the problem by, having a complicated solution. So, we are at this point, well, expectedly, masters at solving linear equations in one variable anyway. So, let's keep to just using one variable when we set up our equations and not x and y or a and b, no? Kung pwede x lang lahat. Yeah? And we demonstrated with this table that we are able to do that. Look at this last row. Doesn't that sort of reflect this first sentence? The sum of two numbers is 10. Yeah? The sum of x and 10 minus x, in fact, is 10. Diba? So this can actually be my representation. No? What if I let x be the smaller of the two numbers? No? Since their sum is 10, and I will let x, 10 minus x rather, be the larger number. Tama, pag in-add ko pa rin, di ba? Pinakita natin sa previous table. If I add x and 10 minus x, correct. Sum nga naman talaga nila ay 10. So that will be my representation. Okay? Now, what about my equation? Tingnan natin dito. Now, there's a bit of a problem here. Just a bit. Okay? Now, the first sentence dito, the sum of two numbers is 10. That helped us in setting up our representation. Now, we will not use the same sentence again to set up our equation. Sure, bakit hindi? Look at this, no? Our representation, based on our representation, x is one of my numbers. 10 is the 10 minus x is the other number. Now, that representation is based on our interpretation of the first sentence right here in the problem. But what if I used it again to set up my equation? So sige, interpret natin to. Sabi, the sum of the two numbers is 10. What is your first number? X. What is my second number? 10 minus x. Sabi sa first sentence, their sum is 10. If I use the same sentence for my representation and my equation, look what happens. X and negative x cancel out as 0 by the inverse property of addition. What do I end up with? 10 equals 10. Sure, tama. Isn't that an identity? Yes. Saka sa reflexive property of equality, di ba? Anything is equal to itself. Correct. 10 is equal to 10. But how does that help me? I wasn't able to determine the value of x. Ganyan ang mangyayari, in fact, if you use the same relationship in the problem to establish both your representation and equation. No? Of course, parang you proved something by using that something to prove it. No? Parang ano siya, you're going in circles. So we don't do that. In such cases, typically naman talaga, there are two or more relationships explaining the problem, which is true in this case. The first sentence already helped us in setting up our equation, our representation. I'm not going to use that for my equation anymore. I'll use the second sentence. Look at this. Twice the smaller number added to the larger results in 13. Yun yung gagamitin ko. Okay? Kaya pag ginamit ko yan, note how the equation that turns out will be, again, we can dissect that. Twice the smaller number, that's 2x, added to the larger, dagdag natin dyan, si 10 minus x, results in means is equal to 13. That is my equation right there. Diba? Ginamit mo yung first sentence, yung relationship 1, kumbaga, to set up your representation, and the other relationship to set up your equation. Yeah? That's the way to do it. We don't use the same relationship in the problem to establish both R and E. Wag. Kasi mag-end up ka lang nun with an identity. And we don't want that. You're just going in circles. Okay? So now, of course, we solve. I'll leave the solving to you, but it should look like this, roughly. Okay? Remember, we're being asked about what the numbers are. So we don't stop with x minus 3. Oh, so x equals 3 rather. Balik sa representation. Ano ba yung isa mong nirepresent? 10 minus x. O, hindi hanapin ko rin. What is 10 minus x? Oh, if x is 3, of course, 10 minus x is 7. Oh, diba? Now again, you can look back. The sum of the two numbers daw is 10. Look at your two numbers here. 3 and 7. Is there some 10? Yes. Look at the second sentence. Twice the smaller. What is the smaller? 3. What is twice that? Twice the smaller. That is 6. Twice the smaller. Added to. Oh, si 6 daw. I-add natin sa the larger. What is the larger? 7. Do we get 13? We do. Correct. So our answer Makes perfect sense. Therefore, now we are confident to state that my final answer is, ganun lang, simple lang ulit. The numbers are 3 and 7. Again, hindi kailangang sumulat ng nobela sa final answer. No? The simple, concise statement is enough. Okay? It's very, very simple. Oh, time out. Tingin sa representation. Here in the representation, we let x be the smaller of the two numbers. Okay? And 10 minus x be the larger of the two numbers. Yun yung ginamit natin. Kaya lang ang problema, sir. Dalawa expression natin x saka 10 minus x. How did we know to represent x to be the smaller and 10 minus x be the larger? How did we know that? Tama kaya tayo? Hindi ba pwedeng baliktad? Hindi ba pwedeng si x yung larger? Tapos si 10 minus x yung smaller? Let's try that. No? That alternative way of representing. Let's see if we end up with that same answer. If we did that, again, baliktarin natin. For my representation, instead of this line on the left, I will let x be the larger of my two numbers. Oh? And 10 minus x, kasi sum pa rin nila ay 10 eh. I will let that instead be the smaller. Now look at this. My equation would be different also. Because, look at the second sentence. Twice the smaller. Ano na yung smaller ngayon? 10 minus x. What is twice that? That's 2 times the quantity, 10 minus x, di ba? Oh, added to the larger. So it's not gonna look like this anymore. Instead, ganito na itsura niya dapat. Twice, look at this, twice the smaller, added to the larger, results in 13. So it looks different. Pero, confident tayo sa sagot kanina, sir eh. Ba't ganun? Iba equation. Try natin i-solve. No? If we solve this, down. Oh, we get 7 as our x. But remember, we're looking for two numbers. So, x, na kuha na natin 7. What is 10 minus x? Di ba 10 minus x ay 3 naman talaga? Oh. So, in the context of answering the problem, my answer would still be, the numbers are 3 and 7. And in fact, it still works. Because the smaller is still 3 and the bigger is still 7. And we tested that already and it worked. So notice sa representation, sir, balik tayo sa tanong. How did we know which to represent? The x or the 10 minus x, whether it's the larger or the smaller? The answer is it doesn't matter. Kasi these are mere representations. They don't imply that one is bigger than the other. That is based on how we interpret the given information in the problem. So whether I represent x as the larger or the smaller, the other one is whatever is left that you haven't represented yet. Basta sinundan natin ng tama yung relationship sa problem, we should still get the same answer. And we demonstrated that right here. Diba? Oh, no problem. Okay, malilito sa step na yun. Sir, anong smaller, anong larger? It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you follow the information in the problem. Okay? Okay naman. Try nyo to. The sum of two numbers is 15. Thrice the larger is 1 more than 8 times the smaller. Hirap yata. Dali lang yan. Find the numbers. Again, pause muna. Hit play when you're done. Right. At this point, dapat meron ka ng solution. So, may the two versions to ulit, no? Tingnan natin. Ano yung version 1? I will let x be the smaller number. Their sum is 15 daw. Diba? So, dapat ganito itsura ng representation. It might look like this. X and 15 minus 6. Again, I don't want x and y. No. There is a way to do that, but you'll learn that in grade 8. Not now. So, for now, we stick to representing our unknowns in terms of the same variable. Based on this representation and interpreting the second statement, that will help us set up our equation, which is 3 times the quantity 15 minus x is equal to 1 plus 8x. Tama? Ganyan din dapat na nakuha nyo. Again, if we solve this, you should end up with x equals 4. And since we're being asked to find the numbers, plural, di yung isa din, what is 15 minus x? That's 11. Okay? So our final answer, again, you can test that. The sum of the two numbers, 4 plus 11, tama, 15. Oh, thrice the larger. Sino ba yung larger? Si 11. What is thrice 11? 33. Oh, thrice the larger is 1 more than 8 times the smaller. What is 8 times the smaller? 32. O, tama ba? thrice the larger is 1 more than. Tama naman, no? Di ba? Pag inad mo ng 1 dito, magpapantay yan. Correct. So we are confident that the final answer is that our numbers are 4 and 11. That's version 1. If you let x be the smaller and 15 minus x be the larger. Now, version 2 is kung baliktad. No? Yung x or y in this case, ang ginawa mo larger. 15 minus y ang smaller. Look, your equation will look different, but you should still get 11 and 4. Again, we tested those two numbers already. We know they work. Our numbers are in fact 4 and 11. Very, very simple. Next. Difference between two integers is 5. If their sum needs to be negative. Uy, negative. What is the maximum value of the greater of the two integers? Pause mo na ulit. Hit play when you're done. Right. Meron na kayo dapat attempt. Uy, iba to ha. Sure. Parang may keywords dito that imply that we are dealing with an inequality. Correct. No? Sabi dito their sum needs to be negative. Ang dami naman negative numbers here. But we do know something about negatives. Di ba? Negatives are less than 0. Di ba? So, our representation muna. We let x be the larger integer and x minus 5 be the smaller. Ito, hindi pwede magpalitin yan. Kasi anything that you reduce by 5, you will always end up with something smaller. Okay? So, our inequality here, the difference between the two integers is 5. If their sum, pag inad ko daw yan, dapat negative. So, dapat x plus the other number x minus 5 is less than 0. Because anything less than 0 is negative. Sabi rito no? The sum needs to be negative. So, we solve our inequality. You can combine the similar terms here to get 2x minus 5 on the left. And then we add 5 to both sides of the inequality. You get 2x is less than 5. And finally, we divide both sides by 2. No flipping. That's a positive number na divisor. X is less than 2.5 or 5 over 2. Now, tignan yung tanong. No? The maximum value of the greater of the two integers. We're talking about an integer here. So, si 2.5 in itself is not, cannot be the answer. Because 2.5 is not an integer. But, again, if you examine this, note, 2 is the next smaller, pero siya yung pinakamalaki sa solution set. Yung hinahanap sa atin, the maximum value of the integer. So anong maximum value? The maximum value is 2. Di ba? So that will be our final answer. The maximum value for the larger integer is 2. Again, you can test that and see that your larger integer cannot exceed 2. If it were to exceed 2, what is the next larger integer to exceed 2? Hindi ba si 3? First of all, 3 is not in the solution set. But fine, if we force that, look, the next larger integer is 3. What is the other number? Kasi the larger is 3. If we reduce that by 5, then the other is negative 2. Pero pag inad mo yan, ang problema mo, 1 ang sagot Hindi siya negative. Di ba? So that also tells us that the maximum value is in fact 2. Okay? Pwede namang 1, in fact, technically part ng solution set yung 1 1. What is if the larger number is 1? What's the smaller number? That's 5 less than 1, so negative 4. Di ba? But if you add 1 and negative 4, what do you get? Negative 3. Tama naman. The sum is negative. But 1 is not the maximum value for the larger to meet that particular requirement. So it is in fact 2. And again, we are confident the answer is 2. Okay? No problem. Ito nga, try nyo. The sum of two consecutive integers is 23. What are the numbers? May isang importanteng tanong muna rito. Sir, ano po ba ang ibig sabihin ng salitang consecutive? Of course, in English, consecutive means successive. Immediately following. In Tagalog, magkasunod. Okay? So, paano natin gagamitin yan, sir? Idea na yan. Again, we organize our thinking. Let's tabulate. Okay? Let's say that the first number of two consecutive numbers is 3. Ano yung next consecutive number? Pang grade 1 na tanong, sir. Ano next after 3? 4. Paano nakuha yung 4? But how? Simple lang. Di yung first number, dagdagan ko ng 1. Diba, consecutive nga eh. Kasunod, plus 1 ka. Okay? So kung 4, kasunod ay 5. Kasi 4 plus 1. Kung si negative 1, pwede rin negative? Pwede rin. Next consecutive niya, add ka ng 1, si 0. Pwede rin negative 9. Negative 9 plus 1 gives me negative 8. Pero pwede rin na n. Diba? Sino kasunod ni n? Magic na yan siya, hindi ko alam yan. Ganun pa din. Dagdag ka lang ng 1. How about e? E plus 1. At si x, with x plus 1. Diba? Consecutive numbers. And again, look at this last row right here. That will meet our requirement in the problem. No? We're looking for 2 consecutive integers. So, pwede natin silang i-represent. Unknown sila pareho eh. We can represent them as x and x plus 1, respectively. Diba? Magkasunod. So, that will actually be my representation. Okay? I will let x be my first integer and x plus 1 be the next. Diba? Napakadali. And then what? I know that they're consecutive, but look at the first sentence here. The sum of those two numbers that are consecutive integers is 23. Sum nilang dalawa is equal to 23. Di na mismo equation ko. X plus the quantity x plus 1 is equal to 23. Diba? Napakasimple. Now I solve this. I combine my similar terms to get 2x plus 1 equals 23. I add negative 1 to both sides to get 2x equals 22. Finally, I multiply both sides by 1/2 to get x equals 11. But do we stop there? Again, look back. Ano ba tinatanong? What are the numbers? Nakuha ko pa lang si x. Yung isang unknown. Sino ba yung isang unknown? Si x plus 1. Di kunin mo rin yun. X plus 1 is 12. Again, you can test that. Question number 1. Are they consecutive integers? Obviously, yes. 11 and 12 are consecutive. Number 2. Do they sum up to 23? Yes. 11 and 12 do sum up to 23. So just by that, thinking out loud, we are confident that our final answer should be that the numbers are 11 and 12. Okay? Ganyan klaseng variation ng word problems natin, consecutive numbers, consecutive integers. Kayo nga, try nyo. The sum of 3 consecutive integers is negative 72. What is the largest of the 3? Okay? Pause muna, then hit play when you're done. Right. At this point, tandaan ha, kapag pinagpo-pause at nagpa-practice, you're expected to write the full resa para na napapractice tayo. Start with R. Kayo din, dapat may representation. In this case, I'm looking for 3 consecutive integers. Sige nga, ang representation nyo, tama. Sa akin, x yung una, x plus 1 yung pangalawa, x plus 2 yung kasunod. Di ba? Okay, so now that we have that, we can set up our equation. Sabi, the sum of those 3 consecutive integers is negative 72. Di add mo lang silang tatlo and equate it to negative 72. Diba? Napakadali. Now we solve. We combine similar terms on the left-hand side. We get 3x is there, and then the 1 and the 2 combine as 3. Then I add negative 3 to both sides of the equation. I'll get 3x is equal to negative 75. And finally, multiply both sides by 1/3. Or divide both sides by 3, of course. You get x equal to negative 25. Do we stop there? Again, no. Look back. What is the largest of the 3 integers? Si x ba yung largest? No. Tignan yung representation. Si x nga yung smallest eh. Sino yung largest? Si x plus 2. So, kailangan ko hanapin. Ayun, si x plus 2. Actually, si x plus 1, walang silbi sa akin in the context of the final question. I'm only concerned with negative 23. Okay? So, that should be my final answer. The largest of the 3 is negative 23. Diba? Super, super, super simple. Okay ulit. The sum of 2 consecutive even. Uy, ano yan, sir? Even integers. Parang familiar, sir, sa akin yung even numbers na yan. Okay? The sum daw of 2 consecutive even integers is 62. What are the integers? Okay? Pause muna, kayo muna. Full resa, ha? Full resa. Then hit play when you're done. Right. At this point, dapat meron ka na full resa solution. I start with my R. Ito, critical. Oh. The sum of two consecutive even integers is 62. Sir, paano to? X plus 1 na naman ba? Eh, tinan natin. Let's pick an even integer. Say, 4. Yeah? If I go plus 1, what do I get? I get 5, of course. But is 5 even? Hindi. Odd number yan, sir. Eh. Hindi ba? Para makuha mo yung next even kay 4, plus 1 ka ulit. Kay 6. Di ba? So, I need to bypass the next number because the next number, after an even number, that's an odd number. So, to bypass that, I will jump right to the next one. Instead of doing the plus 1, pwede pa plus 2 ako to get to that immediately. And that makes sense. If your first number is 10, what is the next even number? Di ba? Plus 2 ka, you get 12. Oh, kahit pa mag-negative yan, negative even, pwede pa rin. Negative 8, for example. What is the next larger even integer? O, di jump ka, plus 2 ka. O, negative 6. O, paano kapag hindi ko alam yung first even integer, sir? X. Ganun pa rin yung idea. Jump ka ng dalawa. Ang bagsak mo saan? Hindi x plus 2. So, x and x plus 2 are actually two consecutive representations, rather, of two consecutive even integers. Diba? So, that exactly will be my representation. X ang first integer ko, x plus 2 yung second. O, ano sabi sa problem? The sum of those two consecutive even integers is 62. So, napakadali. Ang equation ko, itong dalawa, x and x plus 2, add ko lang, ang sagot daw dapat ay 62. Diba? This is actually, these two stages, yan yung critical talaga sa solving problems. Because if you notice, the equations, they're really simple equations. We have solved far more complicated equations than those. Diba? So if you get past the R and the E, do them properly, correctly, to me, it's all downhill from there. So there's really nothing to be scared of pagdating sa mga word problems. It's just a matter of translating correctly, interpreting the words correctly, and setting up the equation properly. No? Again, sabi ko nga, once the correct equation is set up, it's all downhill from there. Dahil napakadali niyan. The quantity x plus 2 equals 62. Again, we can combine the similar terms on the left-hand side. 2x plus 2 equals 62. Add tayo ng negative 2 to both sides. You get 2x is equal to 60. Then divide both sides by 2. We get 30. Again, do we stop? Oh, not yet. Balik sa tanong. What are the integers? Hindi pwedeng isa lang. So, we look for the other. We have already determined what x is, the first integer. Yung pangalawa, hanapin ko rin sa x plus 2. Si 32. Again, you can test. Are 30 and 32 consecutive even integers? Yes, of course. Do they sum up to 62? Yes, they do. So we are very confident that the numbers are in fact, the integers are in fact 30 and 32. Diba? Napakadali. Chicken. Okay, now, what's left to do is for you to accomplish FA 12B, your exit ticket for this session. Now, for this task, ang gagawin nyo lang ay write the representation, R, and set up the equation or inequality of the following three problems. Note, no need to solve. Okay, just set up the representation, set up the equation or inequality, and stop there. No need to solve completely, no need to state the final answer, just the first two stages of the RESA/RISA format. Okay? For these three problems, right there. You have two options, write on paper or accomplish the Google Sheet, depending on your teacher. Okay? But the material, look at the material and look at the instructions. This is very, very, very simple. If there's a problem, you ask your teacher, you consult. Okay? Hopefully, you were able to understand completely our discussion for today. Thank you very much.